Right, I think we're there. I've put up my whole presentation on Scribed, so you can access it if you want to, and I prestigiously last night uploaded all the example videos that I'm going to use today. So even on the online version, you'll be able to see watch all the videos that I'm going to show today. I'm going to use a lot of videos and technology today, and I'm going to make this a really practical session. I'm going to draw on 3 technologies and try to show you some of the work that I'm going to do. I give a lot of presentations. I don't think I'm probably more nervous than I've ever been before, and I think the reason for that is because, in fact, most of the success I've had actually started because of Jisc and because of winning their Times Higher award in 2008, which was sponsored by Jisc. And in fact, the idea that I'm going to show you today, or the main idea that I'm going to show you, was very much supported by Jisc at the beginning of its development. And I'm going to hopefully tell you a bit of a story today that will take you from the original idea that I had to where we are now, and where other organisations around the world are. So I'm really honoured to be here and doing this presentation. I'm very, very quickly just going to talk about a little bit about what I do. I've taken the chance of going freelance after lecturing in universities for about 13 years and living in Spain and Greece previously. I'm really not sure if I've done the right thing. It's been an incredible experience the first 7 or 8 months. I've travelled all over the world giving talks and presentations, but I really, really miss the students. And I don't really know if I'm going to carry on doing this, but certainly at least for a year or so. I still do a little bit of work at Warwick University, and I also work at the at NILE, Norwich Institute of Language Education. But the main thing is teachertrainingvideos.com, which I just literally started as a website to help teachers use technology and bring technology into their classes. And it has got for one individual, some pretty impressive figures. I never know how true 350,000 visitors a year is. I look at the statistics, and that's what it says. One thing I really know is that I got 18,000 subscribers to a newsletter, and I often get 10 to 12,000 people opening up that newsletter every month, which I know is a really high statistic. Anyway, I know a lot of you know the website. It literally is just to help teachers incorporate technology into their teaching, and it literally uses sort of Camtasia videos to take them through step by step using things like Blogger and WordPress and Moodle and Camtasia and Jing and all sorts of technologies. And I still do worry about that, what I call the vast minority of teachers that I think are obviously coming on board with technology, but they've got a long, long way to go. And even today, I get very, very simple questions asked to me. What's the difference? What's a wiki? What's a blog? What's a podcast? It's amazing still how many people are out there who really don't know a lot about the opportunities that technology can offer to teaching and learning. I'm going to tell a quick story, and I just want to make an apology because I just realised I didn't put the attribution to this image, which I have taken from Google, so it's a bit naughty of me, and I'll make sure that on the one I changed that on the online version. I was at a conference, at Beck Conference in 2000, and I saw someone use screen capture technology. At the time, I was studying feedback, and I looked at that technology, and I watched this presentation, and I thought to myself, hang on, that guy has recorded the screen of his computer. That's incredible. I think he was using a tool called Lotus at the time. Camtasia didn't exist then. But for somehow, I had the connection straight away to say to myself, well, hang on a minute. Does that mean if my student sends me their work, I could open their work onto my computer screen. I could turn on this technology and I could record myself correcting the student's work and then send them back the video. And I thought, that would almost be revolutionary. That would be fantastic. What a way of giving feedback to our students. The incredible thing was that I had that idea floating in my head for 6 years. I actually thought that technology was really hard to use, and I didn't know what the guy had used. I just saw the video that he'd produced. It wasn't until 6 years later at the same BET conference, I saw someone make a video, and I realized they literally just clicked a button. And then began my opportunity to try this experiment out. And it was quite an interesting story how I managed to generate a lot of publicity for the idea, because I'm not a researcher, and I don't even consider myself to be a researcher now. I'm slowly learning more about research methodologies and methods of gathering data, but I'm certainly a teacher. And I actually tried the idea out, first with one student in Greece, then with a group of students at the University of Westminster. And I knew I was onto something good, so I phoned the Times newspaper, the Times Higher. And I managed to get through to someone, obviously, who could make a decision or influence decisions, and that person must get inundated with telephone calls, because they said to me, "You've got 10 seconds. So in 10 seconds, I had to explain my idea. And it was a lady, I can't remember her name, but she said, "I love it, I love your idea." And she published in 2006 the idea of using screen capture for providing feedback. Now I'm going to play you an example. This is an authentic example. It's just a small extract. It's from a student 2 years ago on a master's degree program at Warwick University. I'm giving her feedback on her essay. Now I hope this is all going to work, because I'm running it all from my little computer here, but let's just see if I can.
Yeah, interesting point here you're making about the number of blogs that are actually used in education, and particularly the number of blogs that are actually completed and used as part of an formal assessment. And you're taking kind of anecdotal evidence here, but I suggest that if you look at the Blancher article that I've put in the reading list, you'll see that there are actually some statistics about the number of blogs that have been used in education, and particularly those blogs that have been assessed. So I definitely think you need to look at that. Just coming down as well to this part here, you said that the blog that you do is assessed. Can you provide a little bit of information about the way that the blog is assessed? I'd be particularly interested to know what you use as the criteria for actually assessing the blog, and that would be very interesting.
I'll just stop there. That's 46 seconds of feedback. I've opened up the student's work. I've got permission to replay that part of the feedback. I've opened up her work. Hang on, what's that say? Counter the problem. Okay, right, okay. Doesn't very good, is it? I opened up her work. I've opened up the screen capture. I've marked the things that I want to talk about. One of the things I find now is that I tend to focus on 5 or 6 key points that I want to make, and really develop those points. And of course, I'm using it formatively. I'm hoping that she's then going to go back and rewrite her essay based on the feedback that I'm providing to her. But you could just, if you imagine, that was 46 seconds. Imagine writing down that amount of information. Imagine trying to provide that kind of information that I've provided. I'm going to give you another example now. This one is really interesting because it's from a student who I actually use blogging as part of my assessment. So my students are doing a course in using technology in language learning with me. And each week they basically keep a kind of reflective diary as a blog. So they add up the technologies that I've shown them, and then they write about how they might use them in their own context in their classes. So let me see if I can give you an example of that. This is, for me, a really interesting example because let's just watch it
Joe,
first and see.
Very nice to see that you've got additional pages to your blog here, and I like the way that you've used them. I also like the way that you've made your headings nice and equal. The formatting and layout of your site is excellent. One of the things I will point out to you though straight away is that you're not making very good use of space. If you've noticed at the top of the page here, you've got a section called About Me, but you've also got the same thing here on the right hand side. Now my suggestion is that you make a choice of one or the other, because obviously you're repeating information, and as a general point I feel that a lot of the time here on the right hand side you're using a lot of what we call plugins. Now the trouble with the plugins is that they slow the speed of the internet down and slow the speed of your blog down, and so I really think you need to think about the plugins that you've produced here or that you've added to your blog here on the right hand side, and only really make use of those plugins that really add to the value of your blog.
Okay, all right, I think you get the idea. Now for me that was a really powerful one, because up until then, when I was giving feedback on blogs, you've got the blog there on the screen and you're writing about it. They're completely detached. And even if I use podcasting as a way of providing feedback, which has a lot of parallels with my idea of using screen capture, they're still detached. But when you're suddenly opening up the screen of the blog itself and then going through the actual blog and highlighting things, so in terms of applications well outside of language teaching, I mean, that's one of the most interesting things about this idea, that it can be used in so many areas of the curriculum. I'm going to show you the very first idea that I had. I mean, where we are now, and I'm going to come to that in a minute, is that this whole idea has evolved massively. I'm going to show you one of the really early examples, though, because the early examples I did, and I made lots of mistakes. I corrected far too many things. I was plastering yellow marks all over the screen. It was far too much feedback for the student. I hadn't thought carefully enough about the actual delivery of it either. But it sort of just gives you an idea of where we started and where we got to, or where we are now. In terms of this process. One of the things as well is that this doesn't have to be just done on an individual basis. I think particularly back in 2006, there were lots of limitations, even inside of universities and educational institutions generally, that they didn't have fast enough internet connections to be able to really deliver this. Whereas now, of course, it's much more feasible. But this was some of the early work that I did, if I can just get that on the screen. I'm almost embarrassed by this, but it does sort of, it shows a progression.
I just want to go through some of the things in your essay here. My name is Yue Hualu. I am Chinese, but of the moment. Now, you've got the wrong preposition there, so we need to change that if you can. Here you said at the weekends, but can you look at the spelling of that word, because you've spelt that word incorrectly. Now, if we look at this sentence, when I first come to England, now I didn't speak English.
One thing I did like about that, I did think I got right, was the fact that I didn't give them the corrections. Again, I was thinking about it in terms of giving them the guidance for them to then go back and rewrite their essays. In fact, where we've come now, because we've come right up the whole spectrum, is that we're actually using it the other way around, and really we're getting the students to reflect on their own work, and to actually perhaps looking into the idea of them providing feedback to themselves, basically reviewing their work as well as reflection. But I'll come to that in a minute. Since you're in groups, I'm just going to ask you a quick question. You've seen 3 examples, and you've seen examples that are, this one is a mock-up of what I did with the Chinese students right at the beginning, but the other 2 are real examples. Could I just ask you for a couple of minutes, just think about if you were a student and you received your feedback in that way. What would be the advantages? Why do you think, I've presented this idea now in 26 countries, and I'm aware of research taking place in Norway, in Japan, here in the UK, in the USA. I've just come back from Turkey, I was presenting it there. Can I just ask you very quickly in your group, since you're sitting like that, which makes it ideal, what would be the advantages of you receiving feedback this way in comparison to the kind of, let's say, the typical way that we provide feedback, which is obviously just marking and writing notes on the side of the essay or whatever, or at the end of the essay? Can I just ask you to chat amongst yourself and just discuss, just for a couple of minutes, what you think the advantages would be? Hopefully, I know that a lot of people in this room are aware of the idea anyway, because of the fact that, as I said, Jisc has very much been behind promoting this, especially at the beginning. And hopefully, though, the story that I'm going to tell and the work that I'm doing more recently will be interesting in terms of the way that it's developed. I just want to point out, it's an incredibly simple idea in terms of how it's done, and we'll talk about the technologies, but literally is literally a matter of opening up a student's work, marking the screen, turning on the screen capture recorder and doing the recording. One of the biggest problems is the kind of those types of teachers that really like to be perfectionists in the way that they give feedback, and they'll make mistakes and then they'll worry about it and want to start the recording again. I think there's a certain group of teachers that will never be easy using this particular tool, and I've noticed that over the years that I've been presenting the idea. This particular one was just literally something that I did on the spur of the moment. I'd had a group of students, they'd done presentations, I'd been taking notes on their presentations, and I went home and I thought, I'm going to just do one video for the whole class. And then I hadn't really thought about it at the time, but it was a 2-term course, and the students, it was a course that in fact, I think this example is slightly another one. But anyway, the original feedback, the first time I did it, was a 2-term course. And so one of the nice things was that they were able to use this video the next time they went to do a presentation, because they were going to be doing subsequent presentations on the course as well. I think this one's a slightly different one. This is later on in the course. But that idea of feed forward, that is providing feedback that will then help you, the students, in the future on another piece of work. And the great thing about this is it was just one video. I'm going to upload it onto Moodle or onto WordPress or whatever. And I just simply, I'd just taken notes on their presentations, gone home, wrote out the key points, and then just made a quick video which I sent.
Let's go through some of the feedback from the presentations that you did on Monday. The first thing I just want to suggest to you is, all of you is, and a lot of you were doing this, is don't look at your notes really. I mean, you need to kind of be confident enough that you don't need to keep looking down and reading through your notes, because it doesn't sound very natural when you're doing your presentations. As a general guideline, I tend to just take very, very short notes rather than detailed notes. And I notice a lot of you are actually reading from your presentations, so keep that in mind. Number 2, try and rehearse. If you're really worried about your presentation and you're not the type of person that really...
As I said, that could be really useful if the students are then going to go on to do presentations. I remember the first time, not that example, but the first time I did it, that was the case. And it was actually while I was at Westminster, and it was a course in multimedia. But that's just as, you know, so it doesn't have to always be producing individualised feedback to the students. I've had all sorts of responses from the original newspaper article in the Times. People are emailing me all over the place, and one of the most interesting things was, people saying, "Well, Russell, a lot of the time when you give feedback, you're just repeating the same thing a lot of the time, especially in language teaching." And I think the guy's name's Andrew Crair, who at the time was working at Tyneside University. He emailed me and said, "Russell, you could use the same idea, but have a repository of videos already, and then you can direct the students to those." And so that was his idea, something that I experimented with only on one occasion, just simply, again, just to sort of show you how this idea
can just be... I just want to make the point about despite and in spite of. I noticed...
So the students had done essays. There was a problem with in spite, despite. It's a typical mistake in language teaching with the problem of and then the gerund and the noun. And I just simply wrote out the rule and then sent the video to them. Again, really, really quickly. Again, okay, and I admit now that very, very teacher-centric in terms of the way that I first started this idea. As I said, it's evolved massively since then, but I'm just sort of showing you these original ideas. But just to give you an idea of the just different ways that we could use this technology. I mean, just as sort of another example, when I was teaching multimedia at Westminster, we were asking the students to develop websites. That was quite a long, the question was quite detailed, going through all the different pages of the websites that they had to produce, what things we wanted on them, what type of navigation we wanted, where the videos had to be embedded, etc. It's a very complicated sort of assessment question that goes on for about 3 or 4 pages, and then the marking scheme. So I was actually opening that onto the screen and going through it and making a video, uploading the question, but then uploading the video alongside it where I highlighted some of the key problems that previous students had, things to think about in their marking scheme, where to put the focus on, what not to forget, etc. So, what I really like about the whole idea of screen capture is just the incredible flexibility that it offers to us. I mean, obviously on my website, I'm using it just to produce training videos, and I've gone on to do the same thing at Westminster University, even at Warwick. Just making training videos for other members of staff, But there are so many different examples, and this one here is just a mini grammar lesson that just took me a few minutes. And then, of course, and hope in a way, if the students have similar mistakes in the future, just like Andrew suggested, you can then share those videos. You've almost got a repository of them. I'll just quickly play a few seconds of this just to show it as an example.
In a number of your essays this week, that a number of you are getting this wrong. It's not so much the use, you're getting the use of it right, but it's actually the grammar. The point I want to make is, first of all, when we use despite, we don't need to include of. So we can say, for example...
one of the things as well is to try to get the balance between the visual and the oral, because otherwise what I call it almost becomes a glorified podcast, in other words, because you're not really doing a lot on the screen. So I really make an effort when I'm giving this feedback to use the highlight tools, because remember, when you're using these screen capture tools, everything you do on the screen comes out. I mean, if I was to suggest to the student, why don't you look in such and such a website, that would also come out in the recording. So I could even take the whole sort of idea of feedback even further and almost using it as a sort of guide to students in terms of feedback. So that's a little bit about the initial idea, and it did generate an enormous amount of publicity. And as I said, I'm not a researcher. The interesting thing for me was that the research that took place after this. And I always used to talk about this. I used to say, well, I like this idea because it's got added value. We can't do this without this technology, which in many ways is very true. Giving feedback on someone's work on the screen, directly on the piece of paper, with the sound and the visuals as well. That is pretty hard to do, and it would have been almost impossible to do pre-digital era. And so I really like this idea. I'm not quite sure where my idea or the idea, because there are plenty of other people that are also sort of doing the same thing, where it fits in this model, but it's somewhere in that top thing. It's something about using technology to move on our teaching and learning and take it to another level. As I said, the research has taken place all over the place, and some people have been incredibly kind and said, oh yeah, Russell, we read your original idea, we want you to come out here or there and present and talk about what you've done. And I think I've been to 26 countries now and presented this one idea in 26 countries. I've highlighted some of the research, and all of these links work. There's also a Jisc report that's at the end of this as well. Jisc was one of the first organisations that I wrote a report about this idea, knowing very little about research at the time when I did that, but I did my best. But there's some great research taking place. For example, there's one from Peter Matteson in Norway, and I went out and visited Peter, a real interesting guy and a real eccentric. And he's done a lot of work around this idea of using screen capture for feedback, but looking at whole ranges of different areas, geography, history, science, etc. And also looking at the problem of training up teachers and getting them to be able to use the technology. And generally his feedback has been really positive. A nice piece of work in Canada where the teacher has also started to look at something that I became interested in, and that is not necessarily me using screen capture, and I must admit I was sort of in a box at the time, but why don't we give screen capture to the students? Tools like Jing are free. A lot of us at university have Camtasia. There's tools like ScreenR and Screencast-O-Matic, and I've put them in the slides here, that students can learn to use very, very quickly, and then we can get them to do peer evaluation and self-reflection and self-evaluation as well. And in fact, that's what that piece of research in Canada alludes to. So really interesting. And of course, the Open University a few years ago did a piece of research around Jing. Jing is a free tool, and it's probably the easiest one to use. And they were looking at basically my idea of using Jing to give feedback on language courses. And again, that's a really interesting report. The reality is of this idea, it does depend on the infrastructure. If we've got the right infrastructure in place, then it really is feasible and possible to do, and you can train up teachers to use the technology really, really quickly. These are some of the general results of the different pieces of research that have taken place around the world. Students really like the voice. They find it really personal. They really like the idea. I've had students commenting to me saying, Russell, I realise you're trying to help me. In terms of viewing feedback in a slightly different way, because they can hear in my voice that I'm really trying to get over to them that, you need to think about this. Of course, a lot more information can be conveyed, sometimes too much. And that was certainly a problem that I had at the beginning. I was just feedback on everything. Whereas now, I tend to think about it in terms of the learning cycle and think to myself, well, what can I really help with them to improve this essay? What amount of information will help them, rather than just actually sort of marking everything? And that almost requires a re-education of the students' expectations as well, that they don't expect everything to be corrected, and that you're going to give them the key points to improve their essay. you know, quite a few of the students, and in the very first test I did, because I started with just one student in Greece as a sort of pilot, and, you know, the first thing he said to me is, Russell, it's like having you sitting next to me. And we all know that students want conferencing, they want to actually meet up with you, and sometimes that's just not possible. This can be almost what I called a halfway house between conferencing. You know, it's multimodal. I'm never quite sure about this multimodal debate in terms of learning styles. I think we all have all learning styles in my own, but we might have a preference for one or the other. But certainly it is opening up the way that we provide feedback. I think teaching and learning has really moved on. I like to think of it in terms of learning, really. But perhaps the feedback hasn't always moved with the time so much. And so I think this is a step in the right direction, as so is pod feedback using podcasting. The last one I want to point out at the end there is really interesting and something that I only discovered while I was at Warwick University. Over the years, I've probably listened to about 15 or 20 teachers who have sent me their examples of them giving feedback to students. And I know we've all done this in our lives. I mean, I'm definitely going to admit to it. I've marked an essay and I've put a tick at the side and I've said, well done, or good, or that's a good point. But I've not elaborated on why it's good, why I like the idea. I'm sure most of us in the room would admit we've probably done that. I've done it a million times. I've been teaching since 1987. And I've never heard, ever, in any of the feedback seen or listened to a teacher say, go through the video, mark something on the screen, say, yeah, that's good. You just don't do it. You just feel this kind of need to elaborate on any point that you make, whether it's good or bad about the written piece that you're looking at. You tend to elaborate. And the reason I noticed that is because it actually happened. There was a member of staff, I won't mention his name, at Warwick University. I was playing back his example, and he said, oh, that's good, and didn't elaborate. And I thought, wow, I've never noticed that before. No one ever does that. You always feel the need, and of course you've got the capability and to be able to do it, because feedback, you know, the system allows you to say, well, that's a really good point because blah, 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 blah. And so it's quite interesting, that stylistic feature that I've only really become aware of in the last couple of years. Just a quick bit about the technologies. I mean, I use TechSmith Camtasia. I mean, I use it, all my videos on my website I've used it for. I then went on to use Jing for the feedback idea, because Jing is free, it's simple, and it's great to pass on to the students as well. You're limited with Jing to just 5 minutes, but actually in terms of feedback, that's quite a good limit, actually. 5 minutes of feedback is an incredible amount of information that you can provide to students. One of the tools that I've recently kind of got more interested in is one called Snagit. Now, these are all tools from TechSmith, so I don't want to become almost an advert for TechSmith, so I want to point out as well, there are plenty of other tools on there on the internet. One is called Screenr and Screencast-O-Matic. One of the reasons I like Snagit is it is very low priced. In terms of, I think the educational one may even be cheaper than $30, but it allows us to download the recordings onto our computer as well. And that's one of the problems with Jing, because when I've done work with externals, they've wanted to see examples of the recordings. And also just because of security, sometimes we have to worry about uploading the videos onto a server, etc. So that's one of the advantages of using Snagit over Jing, for example, is that you can actually have the physical copies of the recordings on your computer and then share them with your students. Obviously, they're a lot more secure if you then perhaps upload them onto Moodle, onto a specific area for that particular student. Those are all details that we kind of need to consider. With sort of reference to the externals, when I've done work like this, and the first work was obviously at Westminster, they were incredibly enthusiastic. I had an external from Dublin Institute of Technology, and you know, when I showed him the idea and showed him what I was going to do and showed him some of the feedback that I was getting from students, then you know, he was really on board with the whole idea, because one of the things about feedback is that there are so many people interested in it, right from the government to, you know, the institution, to the teacher, to the student, to organisations, employers, etc. And so the stakeholders involved in feedback often mean that change is very slow. But there are a lot of technologies out now that can do this, and some of them are incredibly easy. Somewhere along this process, and it was probably getting to sort of 2009, 2010, as I read more about feedback and I thought more about what we're trying to do when we give feedback, I kind of shifted from the idea of using this technology to provide feedback to my students, or mini grammar lessons, etc., or guidance on their assessments, or guidance on the marking scheme, etc., to thinking, well, hang on, we can get our students to use this tool. And it was from there that I then went on to other technologies as well that I began to use, because as I said today, I wanted to try and show you 3 technologies that I've been working with. I'm going to show you a really short example, and I have to say this one, I haven't got it right yet, but it just shows you, it gives you an idea of what we can do. I've told you I've kind of gone freelance. I go out to places and do training with teachers, sometimes not even in technology, just looking at, for example, the way they give instructions or how they set groups up, classroom management, stuff like that. Trouble often is that I then say goodbye to them and go back home, and I have no contact with them whatsoever. And I never get the chance, or very rarely get the chance, to actually see them implementing any of my ideas in the classroom, or any of the ideas that they've developed from my sessions. One of the things that we started to do, as I said, it's not quite worked, but it's something I'm working on, is that show the teachers how to use Jing or a screen capture tool, and then leave them with a series of questions and say, okay, when you do your classroom practice afterwards, I'd like you to reflect on what you've done and send me the recording. Now, what I'm trying to do here is that I've kind of shifted in my thoughts, and I'm really a believer now in that, developing and encouraging reflection, and I believe that it really is at the heart of what we're trying to do in terms of learning, is because I think the way that the internet and technology is changing our lives means that more and more in the future, students are going to need to be autonomous. They're going to need to be good reflectors. They're going to need to be independent learners. There's more and more and more and more content out there that they can make use of themselves, and they're going to need the skills to do that. And so I'm not sure how we develop those skills, but perhaps one of the ways is by encouraging reflection and encouraging them to think about what they've done. So this is an idea where I'd gone out to Poland, I'd done some training with a group of teachers, and I showed them how to use Jing, I think it was, or it might have actually been, anyway, but I showed them how to use a screen capture tool, got them to do a recording, and then send them back to me. This is work that I'm really kind of looking at now. I've got really no results from any of this yet, but it's just the way that I'm beginning to think in terms of other ways that these tools could be used. So I'm going to see if I can show you this example.
Russell, in answer to your first question, what was your objectives? My objectives were to improve the way I give instructions.
So one of the things with this particular student, and this is one of the problems, is in a way, is that they ended up just answering the questions. So it became like a glorified blog. A glorified podcast, because they didn't really make any use of the visuals. It was just very much answering my questions. And I'm still in a sort of dilemma with, and I'm reading a lot around reflection now, do we guide the teachers and the students towards reflection, or is it something that comes from them? What kind of scaffolding do we put in place? In this particular case, I've put in quite direct scaffolding, so I've given them specific questions. I left those questions to all the teachers that I'd worked with. Not all of them sent me their recordings, but the idea was that they could then reflect on what they'd done in the classroom. But this idea moved on, and it did get to a point where I've got some pretty interesting results in terms of the impact that it's had. In my search for tools that we could use for reflection, I came across 2 other tools that are absolutely fabulous. There are 3 tools on my website. Jing has had more than 100,000 plays over the years that I've had it on there. The other 2 tools that are really popular is this one called Present.me. If you don't know about this tool, this is absolutely fabulous. I'm hoping I'm going to show an example, but I'm going to have to show you this live on the internet. Present.me allows you to upload your PowerPoint presentation or your Prezi or your even connect to Google Docs onto the internet and then add your webcam. So you've got the webcam on the screen, and let's see if I can quickly show you an example of this. I should be able to do it. I think I did set up a few on before. Let's have a quick look, see if we got it. See if I can get it up onto the screen. Sorry, hang on a minute. Did that wrong for a start. Let's have a look here. All right, I might have to just wait for a few seconds and I'll talk why I'm trying to open that onto the screen. So, yes, good. So what we can do is we can get the students, and I've got this in this particular case, obviously one of the things we can do is we can use this for the flipped classroom, for blended learning, etc. We've got the PowerPoint presentation on the left-hand side and the student here on the right. Now, I'm really kind of enthusiastic about this tool, and I'm doing all sorts of things with it at the moment. This was my first test. What I was doing here was that I'd done a lesson using technology. I had a group of students and they were learning about technology with me. They were doing a master's degree program using technology. I'm very skeptical about a lot of the use of technology in the classroom and how I'm using it, and is it really impacting? And I'd set up a particular lesson where I was using a tool that's called Padlet. It used to be called Woolwisher, but they changed the name to Padlet. And I wanted to find out whether that really had worked, whether the activity that I'd done with the teachers. So I was trying to get them to experience technology by doing a lesson with them using the technology. And so I gave Jonathan a series of questions and then asked him to feedback on those questions and to tell me what he thought of my lesson and in different ways it could be improved and what actually really happened. Now, in the past, when I've done work like this, I've always done it as a written piece. And I've always been really disappointed when I've done reflective journals. I remember even doing a reflective journal myself when I did my master's at Westminster, and almost begrudgingly doing it because I had to write 15,000 word dissertation anyway, and suddenly I was asked to write a log as well of my sort of experiences through the dissertation process. And suddenly I'm thinking to myself, is it better? Do we get more reflection and more thought coming out of our students if we perhaps get them to do these things orally? And that's what I'm starting to look at. I won't play too much of this. I'll just play a little bit so you just get the idea. These are included in the online presentation that I give you. This one isn't bad. The next one I'm going to talk about, in terms of the depth of his or her reflection, it was really, really revealing to me. But just to sort of show you the idea, and I'm going to talk about a little bit more about some of the ideas of doing as well with this particular tool. I really like this tool. It's free as well for use, I think, of up to 3 recordings a month. But even the educational version of this, which I've recently paid for, is very cheap. I think it was around about $40 for a year or something like that.
Hi, Russell. This is Jonathan. Now I'm going to talk about my feedback and reflection about Woolwisher activity. The first question is, what type of language processing took place while the activity was taking place? For example, did you speak a lot? Did you read a lot? Our task was to recommend some places to visit in Madrid. After realizing what the text was about.
Okay, so I won't go on. Some really interesting things came out of this because we actually realised that Jonathan had written it all down. We realised that he was reading the screen and he confessed that he did. Which, in terms of language, because obviously these are teachers. They're teachers in their countries teaching English, so their English is very, very high. And my idea of them learning to use technology with me was to actually do classes with them using technology. So we were doing, pretty high level, proficiency level stuff, so that they get the experience of actually using the technology. And now he's using another technology, using Present Me, to reflect on the lesson that I did. So that was an interesting discussion in itself. I was going to show you, because last week I was with a group of students from Kazakhstan, how I've moved on with this idea, because what I'm looking at now is having a series of questions on the left-hand side and having 2 students working together. Now, in language teaching terms, which is really my area, this is phenomenal, because I could actually get them to reenact parts of the exam. For example, in the IELTS exam, it's just the 1 teacher and the 1 student. So we could have the series of questions on the left-hand side, and the teachers, one student acting as the teacher and 1 student acting as the student and answering the questions. And then they could review that, they could reflect on each other's work and think about how to do it better, or I could provide feedback. So I really like this idea. Now, I know there are lots of other technologies we could use. It's just that I'm really happy with this technology. I like the idea that we can upload the PowerPoint presentations or the Google Docs onto the screen, and I also like the fact that it's free. And so so far, I've been really happy with this. Now, the tests I did with a group from Kazakhstan the other day, they worked out really, really well, but I can't play any of them because I did them in the classroom. And one thing I did notice is that when you've got 5 or 6 different groups of students trying to do recordings at the same time, you know, though they liked the activity, the quality of the recordings just wasn't, you know, it was just far too noisy. So it's something always to sort of think about. These are technologies for me that we use outside of the class. They're almost about extending our lesson. But the possibilities of using this particular tool in the way that it could be used either for flipped classroom, blended learning, or get the students to use these tools, it's really, really interesting. So that's one tool, and that's a little bit where I am now with my idea, with looking at student reflection. I'm going to play you a second one now. And this is really interesting. This student's actually gone on to Cambridge. No, in fact, I think in the end she's decided to go to the Open University and do a PhD there. Her name's Cecilia. It was the same class with Jonathan. I gave them a choice of tools that they could use to do their reflection. And again, I've provided you with the example. But the great thing about this one was that for the first time, I listened to a student reflecting on my lesson. And actually, if I was to be honest with you, she kind of took it apart. I realised the activities hadn't worked. It was so interesting for me. I mean, it made me make major changes in the way I used wall wisher in the classroom with my students. And I thought to myself at the time, wow, that's never happened. I've never read a student's reflection before and thought to myself, right, I'm going to make a major change to the way I do my lessons. Yes, there's been insights. Yes, there's been things that have made me think about my lessons in terms of logs that I've received and feedback sheets that I've been provided with. They've made me think about my teaching and learning, but not in the way that this particular one. And that's where I am at the moment. I'm really thinking about, could these tools provide a better way of getting our students to reflect? As I said, I'm struggling with the idea how we develop reflection in our students and how we actually, because I'm not sure if I understand what reflection is exactly myself. I'm kind of working on that with one of the students I'm working with at the moment at Warwick University. But it was really interesting, and it was using a different tool. It was using a tool called My Brain Shark, which is the other tool that I absolutely love. I'm just going to quickly, if I can just get this onto the screen. 1 second. I think I've got it here. Yeah, okay. I'm just hopefully, sometimes when I upload these, it's got a kind of certain period you've got to play it by. Let's just, hopefully it works. Yeah. Just going to play a little bit of it.
Hi Russell, this is Cecilia. Today I'm going to talk about my feedback or reflection on a wall wisher activity we did last Friday. Before I answer any of your questions, I would really like to say that my Brain Shark is a great tool for practicing speaking, because I genuinely believe I have been recording for this like a million times.
I just want to stop it there. I mean, any of you that are language teachers in the classroom, you know, if you ever hear that, that is just music to your ears. Yeah, poor Cecilia's at home doing the recording a million times and practicing her language. It's quite interesting that Cecilia sees this activity in terms of developing her fluency. Of course, actually, it wasn't really. It was really about her ability to reflect on the lesson and to think about what worked and what didn't work in the classroom. Fabulous tool. I had a lot of success with this. I'm going to, it's worked today. I've presented it to you. One day, not that long ago, I was talking about the reliability of this tool, and of course I went to use it in a presentation, it didn't work. So I thought I'll mention the reliability afterwards. And I will say to you, I've been using this now since the time I discovered it, which is in about 2009, 2010. I'm really pleased with this technology. It's worked really well. I'm almost amazed. It's free. What I try to do with these technologies, if I find a technology like I contact the company, because I'm always worried that if I make my training videos on teachertrainingvideos.com and then suddenly a week later the company folds and that technology is not available. So this is a company based out in Boston, and they do lots of work around obviously company training, and again I presume as well they're probably moving into the flipped classroom. I've got literally hundreds of recordings now using my Brain Shark. The great thing about this tool is the students can upload a PowerPoint presentation, a picture, a document, a video, or anything, and then just add their voice to it. It really compresses it down as well. One of the things I've noticed that when I've played these recordings back, in places where I haven't had a very good internet connection, they've still played very, very well. So the compression that they're managing to use is really, really good. I've used this for all sorts of things. It's got potential in speaking activities with students. It's got potential as a tool for the flipped classroom, for blended learning. It's got potential as a tool for the idea of reflection, etc. And again, it's free. It's a tool that's free for students to use. So those are the kind of tools that I'm working with at the moment, and that's really where I am with my own thoughts at the moment, in terms of I've kind of shifted from this initial idea where I was providing feedback to the students and using the technologies where it's very much teacher-centered. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. There are key moments when we as teachers need to intervene and provide guidance to students and get them thinking. But I also really like the idea of flipping the idea and getting the students to use these tools, and whether it's my brain shark or Present Me or the initial work that I did with screen capture, these types of things are where my interests are. And it's almost like it was the period before. I'm thinking about this stuff, I'm reading about it, I can't get my head around it yet, but from my own ability, my own life as a reflective learner and how I've developed as a learner, I think the reflection is absolutely key, and this is really sort of the area that I'm particularly interested in at the moment. Luckily, I've got a few super students at Warwick University that I'm working with at the moment that are really helping me. So, in conclusion, I've tried to show you free tools. I was hoping that most of the audience in front of me were going to be people that are involved in teaching and learning, hopefully even directly in the classroom and actually teaching their students. The tools I presented are really easy to use. They're the 3 most popular tools on my website. They've got so much scope in terms of the way, and I've tried to throw out as many ideas as I can, and I hope that you're thinking about how you could use them with your students. I've just got 2 pieces of advice really. One is, everything I've ever done with technology, I've started small. Often I've just worked with one student or with just one group that I've got a lot of confidence with. And then I've kind of built things up from there. And I really believe that's the way to work. I often sometimes worry about these kind of big policies that come into place and then the whole university is shifting over to Moodle, blah, blah, blah. I wonder sometimes whether we need to be a little bit careful about the steps we take. Certainly for me, I really believe that we need to feel confident ourselves with the technology before we can really, introduce the technology into the classroom and into our teaching and learning. But that's just my own opinion. It's certainly the way that I've worked. I've put some additional references here, including my page, which has got all the stuff from the original article, which is a bit of an embarrassing one really, that I wrote for Jisc, but it was right at the beginning when I was thinking about the idea and obviously very enthusiastic about it. I've included anyway all those other links that are available to you. Any of you that want help in using any of these technologies, and I doubt if there's anyone in this room that would need that help, but you might want to direct your teachers to some, on that handout that I've given you, you've got the training videos on teachertrainingvideos.com that take you through those those 3 tools that I've pointed out. You can follow me, blah, 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 and thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Russell. That was really interesting. I found lots of these ideas really innovative and hold on a wee minute.
Oh, right, okay.
Really thought-provoking. I really enjoyed it.
Right.
We have time for a few questions, so if anybody has any questions, we have roving mics about. If anybody wants to. Margaret?
Right, okay, sorry, I didn't realise you had time for questions. Thank you. So my timing was good then, was it? Yeah, it was, actually, it was. Yeah. Good.
Hi, Russell.
Hi.
Hello, over here.
Right, good.
Can I ask you, do you think that, the more this kind of technique and technology is used in teaching, that the skills required of students will change? I mean, you said reflective ability, but it's that ability to frame your thoughts as well, verbally and orally. Are those the new skills that we're going to be asking of those students?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'm the person to answer your question. I'm not sure if I'm qualified enough, but that is I'm having those thoughts. I've been influenced by I'm just trying to think of someone I was working with doing a MOOC actually at Duke's University with a lady called Catherine Davidson, Dr. Catherine Davidson, Professor Catherine Davidson, really impressive. And she's talking about that. She's talking a lot about this you know, the way that the thought, well, basically our whole mindset almost needs to change in terms of the way we, you know, what we need to think about and those types of, it's a struggle for me. I think that's where I am. I'm at that point in the moment where that's the same with reflection. I'm really starting to think this is really talking about a massive change now in what we need to deliver to our students and how we need to empower them for the future. So that they can access all the content and all the learning. And it's so much now about helping them to be independent learners. And, you know, I don't know the answers. All I know is that's where my own interest lies at the moment. And part of that is also me as a learner. I was a terrible learner of languages. I haven't even got an O-level in French or Spanish. But then I learned to learn languages, and I reflected and thought about how you learnt a language while I was teaching English, and I've ended up becoming quite a good language learner. And people say to me, oh, you're a natural, and I'm not at all a natural language learner. So I do believe that we can build the ability to be better learners, and part of that is reflection. I can't really answer any further than that, but certainly I agree with the point that you're making.
If I may just add, I've come back recently from a study visit to an area near Stockholm called Sollentuna. 17 schools have all been provided with iPads and MacBooks, and the kids do a lot of self-reflection. And they seem so comfortable standing in front of a video camera or looking into into their pad or whatever and reflecting. You know, it's quite striking.
And that's one of the reasons why, as I said right at the beginning of my talk, I really kind of miss being in the classroom, because obviously me zooming around here and there, you just don't get the opportunity to see that, and that's why I kind of miss being in an institution and being teaching in an institution, and that's so valuable, isn't it? Yeah. No, really good point, yeah.
Hi, Russell. Great presentation. Fantastic.
Thank you very much.
I've come to the conclusion as a teacher that your techniques, asynchronous, constructive feedback, are actually superior to the sort of face-to-face feedback most students get in a college or a university, which is often rushed and not archived. In other words, it may be that these techniques mean that teachers have to learn to do things at a distance now and accept the fact that the technology and this approach is superior to the traditional casual marking, non-archived, loose feedback that we often give when we're face-to-face, because we want to get out the door and the student often wants to get out the door. That's not a conclusion you drew in your talk, but are you heading in that direction? Because that's a conclusion I myself have reached.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's part of a kind of, a whole collection of different ways that we can give feedback to students. It's not that it's superior, it just might have value at a certain point. We give feedback all the time to our students when we're in the class, when we're teaching them in all different ways as well. So for me, it's just part of a whole genre of different ways of giving feedback to students. There are problems with this idea, it's amazing how far the technology is in front of the infrastructure. This technology was available in 2000, but unless you had a really fast, and you were very lucky to have an incredibly fast internet connection, it just wouldn't be possible. I've just recently had installed in my home a really fast connection, and suddenly I can see, God, it's even time saving. But you really need that infrastructure in place, and until we've really got that, there's always going to be the problem of time. Because giving individual feedback to students takes time, and if you've then got to wait for it to upload onto the internet before you can then share the link with the student or put it onto Moodle, then that's always going to be a factor. And in a way, it has been the factor, the barrier that's kind of stopped the idea really developing. But definitely, I think it's got real value. When we're looking at that SAMR model, and I'm saying, I think this feedback idea is somewhere near the top there. It really is an idea that we just can't do without the technology. So I sort of agree with you, but I always believe that there's lots of different ways of giving feedback to students, and it wouldn't be just that one way.
Sorry, just a quick question. It may be to some extent specific to the individual institutions, but the biggest problem I see with video feedback is absolutely wonderful. I wrote a million ideas here. The storage space and confidentiality issues. We need to be able to share, especially for feedback, we need to be able to share this securely. and safely to the student only. And unfortunately, server space is always at a premium, so video usually is the last resort because it takes so much space. Have you found any solution to that? Is there a storage somewhere we can upload the video and send a link and a password, for example, to access, or anything like that that can potentially resolve this?
Yeah. When I've worked within an institution, Warwick and Westminster, it hasn't really been a problem in terms of the size of the recordings. For one thing, I am suggesting that Jing was a good discipline for me, even if it's not the tool I'm really using now, because 5 minutes is about the maximum. And the actual size of the video depends very much on how much of the screen you mark out. So, for example, if you remember the first one I did, I was scrolling down. The actual area of the video was actually quite a lot smaller than the screen. And I've also started to realise, this is sort of my innocence in terms of using technology, that really Camtasia, in its default settings, or any of these tools, they often have a lot of what we call frames per second. They're often set at 30 frames per second. 30, sorry, I should say, not with my Cockney accent. And so if you can reduce that down to about 15, because at the end of the day, all you've got is some sort of screen with some writing on it, and it will work at 15 frames, and that suddenly reduces the size of the video down to half. So I don't think storage is a major issue, actually. I've never come across that as a problem. When I've done private ones, yes, it has been, because I've used it like in sort of private lessons and when I'm doing training in other institutions, and then I've had a problem. But when I've worked in an institution, that's not really been an issue. The issue really still is the speed of the internet. That really is the key issue. Yeah.
I was just wondering, obviously, when we are marking students' work, we sign it to authenticate it, because when somebody comes in to inspect from, external comes in to inspect it, then that's a way of, ensuring that it's been marked by an assessor. So how do you authenticate when you're using this type of feedback? What methods of authentication do you use?
Well, I suppose you've got the same, the process normally, to be honest with you, we've never really kind of fully integrated this in. It's always been something that I've been doing. It's not, though at Warwick recently, there have been other members of staff trying the same idea out. Obviously, the students are still, at this case, all our students write everything by using a computer. So basically, I've got an electronic version of what they've handed in. Now, at the moment, what's happening is they're still handing in the paper copy. And then I'm opening up the electronic one, giving my feedback, sending them the feedback, or uploading it onto Moodle, or putting it into somewhere where they can access. And obviously saving a copy as well for an external examiner. But all of those things would need thinking through. We had exactly the same thing happening at Westminster. I've never really got to the point where we thought, right, this is a policy that we're really going to pull right across the whole department, and therefore, because it's been very much, some people have jumped on board and said, Russell, I'd really like to try this idea out. But I've never gone into an institution where we said, right, flat across the whole department, we're going to try it out. So we've never had any specific policy in place. So I can't really answer, but the authentication really has been that, well, I've still got their actual printed copy, and of course then I'm opening the copy onto the screen. Yeah.
Thank you. I think that's about us.
Right, okay.
Thank you very much again,
Cheers.
Russell.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Cheers.